It's time for love. It's time for your love coach. Let's find out if you're ready for love. Here's your marvelous host, Nikki Lee.
Hello, and welcome to the second show of Season 8 of Ready for Love Radio. This is your host and love coach, Nikki Lee. Today, we've got a guest all the way from Italy, and her name is Claudia Monacelli. So, Claudia, it's great to have you with me today.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you for having me. It's Monacelli. Everybody gets it wrong, but it's okay. Just like Monticello. Monacelli.
I knew I would mess it up. See? Hey, you know, they know I mess things up. They forgive me.
Like everyone else.
Well, there is that. So,
we are human after all.
We are. Hey, you know what? What better way to start a new season, right? So,
exactly. Exactly.
They know that I'm imperfect. So.
And they must know that they are imperfect too. That's why.
You know, we all are.
Yeah.
You know what? I looked over your bio getting ready for the show, and you have, wow, is all I've got to say. You have done all kinds of very cool things.
No, God.
And you know, I'm really close to D.C., sometimes too close. You've done some really cool things with the State Department.
Yeah.
You've been an interpreter, and you want to tell us a little bit about what you did with the State Department?
Okay. Of course, you prepare and you study. I have a degree in all of that. But I applied for the State Department, and because my professor was also an interpreter for the State Department, he says, you know, you would be perfect. All right, and a funny story is the day that I just put in the application, I didn't hear from them until 2 months later, and they gave me an appointment in front of the UN building in a hotel, in a room set aside, and you know, that's where I would have had to take my tests. So of course at the time I was living in Brooklyn, I came across to the city an hour and a half early actually. And I thought, I can't wait 90 minutes. And so I went to a small place to have breakfast right next to this hotel. And you know how you have to get everything perfect. The white silk blouse with a skirt, blue, typically business, and your stockings and the whole bit. I go and I have an eggs Benedict, and I was eating, and of course, pluff, a whole glob of butter went right in the middle of my blouse between my breasts. It was terrible. The entire time I was giving the interview, I was at the interview, I had my elbows on the table and my hands crossed in front of my breasts.
There you go.
So it started like that. That's how it started. You know, they gave us a test, and we had to do all the different languages that we knew. And then I started working. And so the work with the State Department, I was a freelance interpreter, and I was stationed out of New York City. So what I got saddled with sometimes was they would send me the bio of someone that they were interested in inviting over if they were to be guests of the United States government. And so I would meet the guest in Washington, D.C. I'd have the bio, I'd have, you know, their information, and I could say yes or no, but I have to give them, within 6 hours I had to accept, without knowing where we would go or what we would do. I just knew their background. It could have been a journalist, a young politician, someone interested in art, anything. So I'd go to Washington, D.C., meet the delegate, and we'd sit down in in the office of, it wasn't a travel agent. They had a certain name for it, but it was the agency that took care of all the travel arrangements. And so there was a dialogue. Well, what would you like to see? Is there anything specific? Are you interested in talking to the media and all of these? And so there was the interpreting back and forth and back and forth. And so we knew that we would go to Charlottesville. That's very dear to you. And that would be usually one of our first stops. And then we'd go on, other different places, San Francisco. So you didn't know what the weather was like. That was the first difficulty that you encountered, because you had to have everything in your suitcase, cold weather, warm weather. And so that was part of the adventure. And then, of course, I couldn't travel at the time when I was doing it. I couldn't travel with dictionaries, so you really had to think on your feet. And there was not access to anything wonderful like internet or an iPad that I could hold in my hand and just click away while I'm talking. So that was really challenging. So that was let's say that the type of work was you were on a one-on-one, usually a one-on-one, except during the elections there was a group of NATO countries that came over, representatives, and I was assigned to 2 Italian delegates, and there were 2, and they were from 2 different political parties, and they did not agree, and it was so difficult to be with them all the time. It was very difficult. So a lot of the work wasn't really just about the language, but the interpersonal relations and how to tiptoe into and out of the dance of conversation, and being delicate but not and stern at the same time, being the gatekeeper for when who had to talk next, and I got into a couple of situations that were difficult. I mean, in the United States, probably in many countries around the world, when you talk to someone, you just don't typically ask them how much money they earn or what their paychecks is like, right? So we were, you remember Star Wars, the Reagan era, right? We had this group, this NATO group, and we went to, well, I won't say where, but it was an underground place where the Star Wars played out. I mean, where typically the general would have signaled different attacks and stuff like that. But to get there, we weren't able to bring pens, pencils, nothing, pads, nothing. Go in, and they give us a tour of the entire place. And they were talking over me. One especially. I was starting to say how many tons of spring and all of that, and he was saying, "What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?" and in this whisper interpreting, because there were no booths, soundproof booths. So as you whispered, you heard the original message, and so that was a challenge. When we get to the end of this tour, we sit in this conference room, and the general came out with a whip in his hand, cowboy hat, boots. And one of my delegates said, "Ask him how much he makes. Ask him what he earns. Ask him what he earns." And I said, "I can't. That's not what." And I went halfway through my sentence. He stands up in an Italian. He says, "How much money do you make?" Just like that. I could have fallen into the ground. So I stood up and I said, "The gentleman to my right would like to know how much money you earn." It was a terrible question. So then he says, "I don't know how many thousand," but which was a bit of not, well, government officials usually make less than the private sector, but at that time he said what he earned. I think it was something like $35,000 a year, which is, we're talking about the 70s. And it was low. I mean, when it was low, and he was saying, "You think that?" And he started yelling and screaming because he saw the faces in the crowd, in the audience, in the hall. And he went on and on and on. So sometimes, you get in these situations where socially they're very delicate, and you can't account for someone with poor manners. That's
right.
It. Yeah. Difficult.
So obviously you have to repeat what they say or ask or whatever. Wow.
Well, that's sort of it's sort of a fallacy, the idea of repeating, because there's never a one-to-one meaning for meaning in two different languages. You interpret. So if they say something, because even with my husband, who I have known for over 40 years, I still have trouble understanding. So with another person that you've never met before, inevitably there is a difficulty in communication. There always is. I mean, communication is difficult, and I know that you know that. But you interpret what they say, and sometimes people think they might know more than you do. Especially another difficult case is press conferences, where the press typically are very, very stern, and they sort of monitor you and feel that they know, much more than you do. And so I got into a situation once when I was interpreting something that a guest had said, and they came out after me 3 times. Can you tell us exactly what they're saying? We want you to tell us exactly what they're saying. 3 times. And I said, well, Italians are very gracious. They love to hear their language spoken by foreigners. Why don't you ask him directly? That was the end of that. They just shut up. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and the press is trying to catch you, so they're saying it in a sneaky way anyway. I would think some are anyway.
Yeah.
I don't want to get myself in trouble.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is. I mean, everybody does their job, and the press has a high-powered job, and they, have to get their story straight. So, but there were other times when I worked with the press when the exact words or turns of phrase or metaphors that I used were actually printed in the newspapers the next day, which was, gratifying. I thought very small gratification, but at least, someone was listening.
Yeah. This is true. Wow. So what is one of the hardest things about being an interpreter did you find?
Well, I think that one of the hardest is, like I said, it's never about the words or the knowledge that you have, but it is about the political, social interaction with the people that you're working with. If you're traveling and you're a liaison or a diplomatic interpreter, that is the most difficult thing that you have to deal with. When you're working in a conference with earphones on and in a booth, that is probably one of the easiest, because you don't have face-to-face interaction. You can work in a different way and relax, because people are not always eyeing you up and down, and that could make you nervous. But working in a booth has its positive sides to it. But the most difficult is that social dance in and out of talking, because some people think that everyone speaks and communicates to make themselves understood, but not so in politics. Politicians invariably want to not be understood 100%, or they use such fluffy language to conceal what they're trying to say. This is notable. I mean, this is has been noted by many academics, and it's typical of political language. And all you have to do is take a speech by any politician, any single politician, run the speech through software, and even with just a repetition of the key words, you can see how what the message is like right away. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see it from afar, studying it from afar. But when you're in the trenches and you're working, getting those words in and out, it could be, it's challenging. But then, there is the other side to the story, Nikki. I mean, sometimes you have to interpret people who, I mean, you just wish they'd shut up. And you're thinking,
politics, yeah.
Please stop.
boy, I could go on about that for the next 5 hours. So yeah, I would.
I'm sure you can. I'm sure I can too.
Really. I bet you have a list of people that you could go on about that for. That's too funny. So what was the most fun thing about being an interpreter?
Well, when you work with people who, in the case of the State Department, who are fun, they're just fun. For example, I worked with a curator, a woman who had worked in a modern contemporary museum in Milan, and when she came over, we were together for 2 weeks, and she really wanted to have a good time in the evenings after I worked all day. She really wanted to go out and eat and drink, and and I was just so tired. But that was fun. I have to say, it was a lot of fun. Sometimes the members of the team are also fun. If it's a large group, the State Department employees, excuse me, are really a lot of fun. And so, go dancing and things like that. That is, it could be very fun. But, typically my motto is when you work hard, you play hard. And that's, that's what I did a lot.
Well, I think in order to maintain that pace and to maintain your sanity and your mental well-being, I think you have to play hard when you work hard. Almost to maintain that balance, you kind of have to.
Yeah, you do, but there are so many things you just can't do. I mean, you have to. Your voice is a really delicate instrument, so you can't stay up that late. You can't get hardwired drunk the night before because then you just can't act. So when you're on an assignment, you're on an assignment.
True.
But meeting people from all different walks of life, that definitely is probably the best, probably the most interesting side to the story, yeah. And I actually used to think that the travel would be the positive side, but nothing is farther from the truth. Traveling was such a pain in the neck because you don't get to see anything, and you really don't, it takes up a lot of time, and then there's the time zones, But it has its positive, sides to it. Like any job, really. But it was a challenge. It was a real challenge. And what I liked the most about it, Nikki, I have to say that when you do such a job like that, where it requires, I guess, a little bit like you and I are talking now, you're on the other side, and you're listening to what I'm saying, and you're paying attention, because then the rest of our conversation will derive from what we're saying. So it's very difficult for your mind to wander, I would imagine, right? And what I liked about that work, this interpreting, especially the simultaneous interpreting, is that once you do it, your mind is there, you're in the moment, and then you go out of that, and then you leave it behind. That's what I liked about it. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I mention on here so often is to actually be in the moment when you're talking to somebody and listen to what they're saying. Because, so many times when you're talking to somebody, they're not actually listening to you. They're thinking about what they're going to say. They're planning what they're going to reply.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
They're planning their comeback. But the thing is, they're not actually listening to you completely. And then pause and then reply. They're planning the comeback. They gotta have the snappy comeback. And the thing is, if you're spending all this time, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? You're not hearing this person singing to you. You know what I mean?
I had a very negative experience, because I too have a podcast. It's called Multiple Voices, and one of my guests came on the show, and I would ask her questions on the basis of her bio, just like you have done, and she just would never answer the question. She would just go say one sentence and then go on to something else, maybe a book promotion or something. It was driving me crazy.
Don't you get that? Oh, maybe people do that.
But not only, at one point, since she was promoting her book, she said, please indulge me. And she started reading from the book. It lasted 20 minutes. I didn't know what to do.
You know, the service I use has a mute button. I'm just saying. You can mute the person if they do that.
Really? Yeah, right.
But I just, you know, just in case that would be useful.
I know it's terrible to talk bad about somebody. Boy, that really, it taught me a lesson. It really did teach me a lesson. I'm still not sure exactly what lesson it is, but I learned that maybe to cut people. I don't know. Do you ever cut people off, or has that ever happened to you?
I have occasionally. Sometimes I do it joking because, like, I've had somebody say something, and I get an idea of something. I'm like, whoa, hold on. What did you just say?
Yeah.
It's something funny. But and I did have a woman one time, and she says, "Well, not to bash men," and I wasn't gonna have that. So I cut her off, and I kind of put her in place. I have a few times, but I usually pre-screen enough that, and I've actually had a couple come on. And I've talked to them enough at the beginning to know that I didn't want to have them, and I've like canceled the interview.
Yeah.
But well, and I pre-record. So if they ramble on for 20 minutes, I'll actually record more than an hour, and then I like chop it when I edit.
Right. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
I usually work around. If somebody goes on a tangent I don't want, I'll just chop it. So.
Yeah.
No, see, you had me give all my secrets away to the listeners.
I was just going to say, you know, you're giving away your secrets.
But I mean, sometimes. Well, my thing is though, an interview is a give and take. You know, I've had people before that have said, "Well, I'd love to give a talk to your listeners." I'm like, no.
Oh no! Yeah.
No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for an interview. You know, and they're like, "Well, but this is my specialty." I'm like, "Well,
yeah, I know.
But I'm a coach too, and I want us to have a conversation for the listeners. You know, if you want to give a talk, then schedule yourself as a speaker somewhere. That's not what you're doing here.
Yeah.
You know, so I have a format, and that's what we're going to do, or you're not coming on. You know.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't spend 8 years building the show up to have speakers come on and. No.
Exactly. Yeah, no.
It's like my show for a reason.
You know? Exactly. Go get your own show.
Exactly. You build up your own show and be a speaker if you want to. But, wow. But anyhow.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about language and you know, it's funny because, for example, I had poor woman, she's passed, a sister who was a hairdresser. And of course, I'm a linguist. And she said to me, "No, Claudia, look, when you see a person, their head is the most important thing." And I said, "No, come on. When they open their mouth, that's the most important thing." So, of course, everybody has their own, you know, importance. And if you're a fashion designer, of course, clothes you wear is the most important. But again, I still say language, you can't do anything without it, really, can you? Well, true. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe.
Well, but now communication is more than just how they speak, though.
Right? Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Because you've also got body language, which is part of how they speak. Of course, with the internet and chatting and direct messages and text, we've lost a lot of that.
Well, and probably one of the most important things are the eyes, and how the eyes, the communication with the eyes. Yeah.
Exactly. This is too funny, and it's a little off topic, but I got a new cat lately, And she's got the most expressive eyes I've ever seen. Oh, my goodness, it's hysterical. But anyway, totally off subject. She gives you these expressions that are priceless. Oh, my goodness, it's hysterical.
I've got another story off topic, but it's with the eyes, and it's funny. I also dance Argentine tango, and there you just don't speak. And, of course, the interesting thing is that you are invited to dance with the eyes. The man looks at you. Ooh. You have the option not to look at them. If you don't want to be invited, you just turn your head or tie your shoes or get up and go to the ladies' room. But once, from across the room, this man looked and nodded and came towards me and right across the dance floor, and 3 of us stood up. 3 women, and he went through us to get his coat on the ledge behind us. Oh, it was so funny. That eye communication did not work very well.
That's bad. Oh, that's funny. Oh, my gracious. Okay. That's bad. Okay. Now, you do work with couples with archetypal psychology.
Right. Yeah.
I have been very, very curious to get more information about that.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, if I said to you, Nikki, you are a queen, you'd know what I meant. Or if I said, God, you look like a bag lady today, or something. Or, so, I mean, there are images that are fairly universal, but bag lady will probably be relegated to the English language, but more or less, they're understandable. Now, I think it was about 4 months ago, I did a study with different couples. It didn't have to be a romantic couple. It could have been business partners. It could have been husband and wife. It could have been family members or friends. And all I needed was their first name. I said, give me the first name of one and the other. It could have been 2 women, 2 men, a man and a woman. It didn't matter. And so I ran them through the way I work with couples and the archetypal readings that I give couples. And out of these 100 couples, there was an underlying archetypal pair that was the most common. And I'll tell you that and how they interact, their mental and emotion, how they interact mentally and emotionally. And the pair is the king and the maiden. Now, listen to this. If I came, say a couple comes to me and they correspond to the king and the maiden, and they ask for an archetypal reading, and I give them, this, I'm brushing the surface here because it's a long process, but let's say that for the king, self-esteem and self-respect motivate him or her, because women also come out as kings. And for the maiden, she's motivated by safety and security. But the king needs to feel vulnerable in order for him to change. And sometimes a tragic event is what does it for him. There's a tragic event and he changes. The maiden can help him relax and see the beauty in the world, but she's naive. And it will only bring the king out in him full force. She is his responsibility and under his control. She won't be able to harbor change. She won't be able to help him change. She's very spontaneous. She's adventurous and most of the time, and can show him a good time if they travel. And however, he may be too demanding with her at first because she's so easygoing and innocent, and she won't challenge him outright. He tries to protect her from the harshness of life. But she, in her life, needs to stand on her own 2 feet. But the king wants to take care of her and doesn't want to teach her to be independent and self-reliant. So he can feel young again around her. This is the positive side to that couple, and enjoys showing her off. She's his possession, and he doesn't think she can live without him. But the maiden usually is more resourceful than he thinks. She does look up to him. He's the rock of her life and her personal defender. But they clash if he lets down his guard and isn't there for her when she needs him. After a while, his demands change the maiden. She becomes harsh, or she could become jaded. And if this happens, he will be wondering, scratching his head, thinking, where did the sweet woman I fell in love with, where did she go? And eventually she'll learn to stand up to him, and that's the end of their relationship. So, I mean, I made it very short and it's superficial, right. but you get the picture.
Right.
And so when I go through usually it's a longer, of course, the reading is longer. The people that I work with are, oh, my goodness, that's right. Oh, gee, how did you know that?
Right.
And it's very eye-opening. What I like about it is that it opens a person's eyes without going into the, question and answer to the one side of the couple or the other. What do you do when this person does that? How do you respond to? Because it takes the pressure off of individuals and puts it out there on a universal plane where people can reason almost in the abstract, and they learn immediately, they figure it out immediately, and I love it. I just love it. It's
right.
It's very intuitive as well. Yeah.
That fits so many people. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, this was the most common. The most common. And, well, of course, there's so many pairs. Every single couple has a different pair. There's something, for example, there are females can correspond to something called the female messiah. And the king, what happens to the king when he encounters the female messiah? And we know from what I've just said is that he needs self-respect, he needs self-esteem. And he has an aesthetic need to be connected to something greater. And that motivates the female messiah, but not the king. The king wants self-esteem, self-respect. She needs something greater. But he needs, in order to change, he needs to feel vulnerable to change. And he needs that tragic event. And she can help him change. But he will not enjoy the way she goes about it because she can be pushy. She needs to let go. She needs to learn to let go of the outcome of an event and to trust what guides her intuition. And he is so used to structure and planning that he can't help her with all of that. He's not even sure he believes what she believes in. And at first it may seem funny to him, but sooner or later he'll expect her to calm down and find a new direction in life. And so if he's willing to suspend his disbelief, he can be an asset to her because he can help her make a plan and get people together to carry out that plan, like a business. But he can be a drawback if he refuses to take her seriously or to believe in her, and that's where the problems start. He can cause her to doubt herself and what she's doing. He may also try to do everything for her and take control of the situation. He won't do things her way, and that's the problem. So, but she won't sit still so for too long unless she's living in a very oppressive society for women, where women, let's say, don't get up and leave the homes soon. I'm thinking of a society that could be like India or many others where women do not have the freedom. They don't choose to be free in their decisions. And this doesn't fit well with the king. He wants to build his mini kingdom, starting from his home, And she's always on a new agenda or a new cause, and the king can't deal with that. And either he's the number one thing in her life or it's over, and it's usually over. Now, these are two
right.
stories that, they're not happily ever ending, but not ever after, but still there are some really, really great, for example, there is the pair of the femme fatale with the ladies' man. Oh, they really, really feed off of each other, and you can imagine how, because they both make each other jealous, but also intrigue each other. And you would never think that a ladies' man could pair up with a femme fatale, because he would have his entourage and she hers. But it's fascinating to see. It's really it's fascinating, really, really fascinating.
Interesting. I'm actually picturing people in my head as you're describing these.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing, because archetypes are universal symbols, and people can understand them when you talk archetypes. If you talk archetypes, then I know that my son says, if I say, call him up and I say, well, how are you doing, and he's saying, look, it's not my best day. I feel like like a pauper, So, and that's Did you lose money today? What happened?
and you understand exactly what's going on, right?
Yeah, exactly what's going on. Yeah, there is a loss.
This is bad.
Yeah,
that is so bad.
I was on a guest on a show with two young women, millennials. Indian women, actually, but who were very mysterious, and they never show their faces or their real names, and they were interested in the psychology of archetypes, and because they had studied archetypes, and so they had studied psychology, and so I said, okay, well, let's do both of you as a couple, as a business couple. It was fascinating. They were game. I had to admit they were game, and they, stood to the challenge. And one of them came out as being a storyteller, as an overarching archetype. I read 4 different, and one of the different archetypal readings is that when you transgress. Typically you go beyond, you go out of the envelope space. You go beyond what is considered legal in inverted commas. Typically transgressions would be in the bedroom, instead of the boardroom. And one of the 2 women was an overarching, had the overarching archetype as a storyteller, but the other, when we talked about transgressions, she came out as a storyteller. And it was fascinating, it was fascinating because you could see her in her, romantic dealings as a storyteller. She would be the one who created the entire plot. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And the other came out as being I don't know if it was a messiah or a nun, but it was a religious archetype, and so that also had its fascination in the bedroom as being completely out of if you want to transgress and you come out as playing we could say a role, but it's interesting. It really is interesting. Yeah Interesting.
Well, I'm familiar with the archetypes, as far as writing and looking at into your characters and this sort of thing.
Right, exactly.
But I'm not familiar with the psychology of them at all. But
oh yeah. Well, let's say that James Hillman is the man who is the psychologist who coined archetype psychology, who studied with Carl Jung, and he was the first director of the Jung Institute in Zurich, and he comes from Atlantic City. Think of that. And he's fascinating. He is fascinating. His writing, his books are just fascinating. And he didn't want to dumb psychology down. That wasn't the idea. But the idea was to take the pressure off of making people feel how, understanding a person's own, for them to understand their own issues. And it was being one more step in the direction of self-care, let's say healing within a couple of some sort, which was interesting. It's interesting for me. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it makes sense that, it's easier to relate to a story than to relate to you did this or you do that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, because it within, let's say in the home, let's say the woman is a maiden in the home, but when she gets on the workplace, she's a king. So she takes on a different role, and so it's different. If she has a king at home, she can understand the king if she is the king on the workplace. And so there are a lot of different ways. It's easy, like you said, it's easier to understand something when it doesn't touch you directly in many ways, but that you can relate to. That the idea is that the relating has to be there, and it has to resonate with them for it to be effective. Right. Yeah.
Well, it's also like people sharing memes on Facebook.
Yeah.
The thing applies to them, but if you tell them straight out, they'll never get it. But then 2 days later, they're sharing a meme that says the exact same damn thing you just told them. You're like,
right.
I just told you that.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's on a meme with pretty kitties, and they're like, oh.
Like now, don't knock that type of communication.
It works. I'm just saying, it works.
Yeah, it does work. Yeah.
Like, wish I'd said that. Yeah. And I've got one friend that does that all the time, and I'm like, oh, it did get through. Like, okay, her subconscious got it. So. Oh, that cracks me. Every time I see those on her page, I just laugh. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. What's your favorite way? Now, I mean, I'm going to ask you a question if you don't mind. What's your favorite means of communication? If you had to pick one.
If I had to pick one, it's not text, it's not chat. Probably depends on who I'm communicating with.
Yeah.
I actually like letters.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Because it's more personal.
Yeah. I do like talk. I like the conversation, I think.
I do. Yeah. Well, I like talking in person, face to face, so you can actually see the person.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's much better, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you reach out to the person if you want to.
Yeah.
But, yeah. There aren't enough chances to do that with some people, but, yeah. You lose too much when you can't see them.
Yeah. It's true, but it also has, it gives you the opportunity to be able to use your imagination in a way that you wouldn't, if you were watching someone. Because the person's voice really does talk about them, tells a big story about them. Yeah.
True. Well, the thing, too, is there's too many times, though, when you're talking, like on the phone or whatever, and somebody else will butt in, And there's actually sometimes when I talk to some people and I just want to say, would you just go outside?
Yes, would you just go outside?
Would you just take the phone and go outside where other people aren't?
Yeah.
Because it's just, if you want to talk to them, then hang up. Oh, gracious. It just, if I want to talk to the other person, I'll call them. I know that's mean. Just mean.
Yeah.
So what is this about linguistic analysis of TV series?
Okay. Well, the interesting part about linguistics is that you could really do anything. You could study voice communication, written communication, television series, journalism, newspapers, the media, blogs. That's been popular very recently. And what I did for a while was, this is the way it started. I was interested in writing a book on women of power, not necessarily women who have power, but women who are either influencers, or who have a following, and that's why they're powerful. So, because secretly, inwardly, I was thinking that was my role at the university, because I work at a university. I'm a professor at a university, and I get very frustrated with the powers that be. And I know, and I have power. I've got power. So I was writing a book, and I sent a book proposal to my publisher in the Netherlands, and they came back saying, "Oh, this is great! Give us more. Give us a chapter." And then when they came back to me, I said, "No, I can't write another book. Not another academic book. I can't." Because typically there's a very restricted readership, and it becomes dry. The writing is drier, than the more disseminate-ish. You want a book to be disseminated and to be read, and enjoyed, and you use a different language, right? So that original book, I said, no, I want to publish in the United States. That's how I started. And the idea was that originally, women of power, and I studied different, for example, one of the TV series that I studied in detail was Scandal, that you may know of, with Kerry Washington. Yeah. Right. And so I studied her language in all of the episodes and series. And another one that I worked on a lot was Homeland, the protagonist of Carrie. She was a CIA agent. And so there, because they were women, in Carrie's case, she had this bipolarity, and I was interested in knowing how they depicted a woman that had her power, because she was very influential. They would send her anywhere because of her. She was so dynamic, and she was brilliant, And however, her bipolarity seeped into the storyline at certain points of the plot, which were fascinating to me to see. And she even falls in love, but it was during that moment that she falls in love that her bipolarity didn't exist at all. But then, it's fascinating the way the way producers create a storyline and put in elements that will show you something, then remove it. And my take in studying these different TV series was that these were basically fashioned on real characters in real life. Surely Kerry Washington's character was an influencer in New York City, in Washington, D.C. And how the TV series influences viewers as well, because they create then another generation of people of women who think that they need to be high-powered in a certain way, and so that's the idea of writing that book. So now the book that was called The Women of Power is now the magic of pleasure seeking.
Yeah, I saw that title.
Yeah, The Magic of Pleasure Seeking, which is based on archetypes. So there'll be a chapter on every different female archetype where I use, examples from that study. And the idea is when you work with the linguistics, what we call the delicacy of an analysis is, for example, I could study all of the pronouns, I, you, we, they, how they are used in sentences and in the script, and see who says that, and when the main protagonist, if it's the woman that I'm, analyzing, how it becomes inclusive or exclusive, and depending on who she speaks to, and how much distance she puts between people, and the greater distance, the more power she has. And it's complicated to explain, but it's fascinating because on the one hand, people who read studies like this, they say, "Oh, come on." I could have told you that, but then they miss the glaring reality that they would have lost, that they lose without looking under the surface, where she does have a soft spot, she does has a weak side to her, as Carrie has in Homeland, and her language changes, but not that much, and it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. For example, in of course, maybe your audience, not everyone may have seen Scandal, but in that TV series, Kerry Washington, it was Kerry Washington, yeah, I can't remember her screen name, but anyway, she came from two parents, and one of the parents was this female spy from somewhere. We never get the clear picture, and it's fascinating when we see how this poor woman, this poor Carrie, comes out of two parents who didn't even communicate with each other and had, so many secrets one from each other, and she came out never understanding who her parents really were,
True.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
I loved the first part of that series and didn't like the second part of that series at all.
I agree with you. And I think they pulled it out too much. I think that there was, all right, her father. How mean of a man could he have been, and how many people could he have killed? It was not credible after a while.
Well, it just wasn't. Well, and as long as it was focusing on her work, but
yes.
then when she got so completely tied up with the president, it just lacked credulity to me.
Yeah, that's true.
And
too.
But I loved it in the beginning. The first couple seasons, I would have watched it, 4 or 5 times a week. I loved it so much. But then it got to the point, and no. Well,
there was a shift in the plot when she then starts being the consultant for the president's former wife. Yeah. Because she then runs for president, and so then you're thinking, come on, only on TV that could happen.
Yeah, like I said, she wasn't the same character, and it just no.
Yeah.
But I loved it in the beginning. I just raved about it to everybody.
Yeah.
And then it there was one season, and it just like, no more.
Yeah. There's the other TV series, Madam, what is that? I can't remember the name of it. Madam Secretary. Yeah, I'm sorry that didn't go forward, because I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed her relationship with her husband and how they...
That was interesting.
Yeah, how they had to communicate, and how, this give and take, and his I don't remember if he was a historian, if he was an historian.
He had an interesting job, which added interesting undercurrents to what she was doing.
Yeah. But that is another series I would have liked to get my hands on.
It's It's on Netflix now, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen it, but I think there are no longer any seasons. I don't think. I think it's over, isn't it?
Okay, I thought there was another one.
Tell me, because we in Italy get them later, and we don't get all of them. So maybe I'm behind. Come on, please tell me that there's more to come.
Okay, I'll check. I was thinking that there was.
Give me hope.
Maybe not. I didn't see the last one, so I could be wrong, but I'll do some looking.
Yeah. She was up for the presidency, I think, when the president either passed away or got sick, and they were thinking of her to run, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
All right.
Something like that, yeah.
I'll check. Yeah. I'll look when we're done. But yeah, I like that. I like that very much. But I like her and I like Tim Daly. So, and like I said, there were a lot of things about the show that I liked how they did it.
Yeah.
But in self-preservation and simultaneous interpreting it actually sounded interesting. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, that's interesting in the sense that I had real texts that from interpreting the source text, we call it, what an interpreter listens to, and then the production, the target text. And what I looked at was cases of self-preservation in this sense. For example, there's an interpreter, this is one of the cases, there's an interpreter at a press conference. No, she was in a booth. She was in an interpreting booth. And there was an Israeli woman. It was a woman's delegate, conference, Mediterranean, women politicians in the Mediterranean. And the Israeli got up and started talking in English and said, please forgive me. I had a sore throat yesterday. I, had a fever and I had sore throat today, and I wasn't feeling very well. And but I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today. And I think it's important for us to all have the opportunity to speak. And then she stops just very briefly, turns. She was on the podium. You could literally hear her turn away from the microphone and said, "I heard what you said. I heard what you said." And she was talking to another female politician from another country. And for the Italian interpreter to say "you," because in Italian there is the formal "you" and there is the informal "you," and in English you just say "you," right? And when you point to someone in a crowd, when you point to someone in a conference, that is face threatening, and you wouldn't do that. So what the interpreter did was she distanced herself, and this was to save her own face, saying, what would you do if? What would you do if? I heard yesterday there was talk of the passive voice. There was talk, instead of saying that you said this. And so that was one way of protecting her face. Why do I say that? Because interpreters, especially in the simultaneous working mode, are taken to be the speakers. And especially if you're listening and you don't understand the other languages, you have to listen to the interpreter. You think that's the interpreter saying or swearing or doing anything. All those, the faux pas. And what I found, and this is across the board, all of my participants did not swear. They did not. They always distanced themselves. They always used the third person, as I did when I was in at that Star Wars compound. I said the man to my right, the gentleman to my right. It wasn't me. It was him. And right. Because they will not accuse or direct any direct attack on anyone, and it seems like an unspoken policy because it's not something. I teach conference interpreting. It's not something we say in class, but we do bring our research, and this is one of the things that has come up there. Yeah, and that's how people protect themselves and protect their face. Yeah, it was a linguistic study as well.
That's a good idea. Do you want to tell people how they can find more information about you?
Sure. I have a website, which is www.claudiamonacelli.com. You can find everything about me there, usually, and a way to contact me. I'm on Instagram, The Magic of Pleasure Seeking, Twitter, Magic of Pleasure.
All right. Tell you
Nikki,
what.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Well, see, speaking of pleasure.
Right.
Oh, well, I tell you what. I will have a replay of today's show, and I will have links to your information and your bio.
Sure.
And it will be on lovecoachjourney.com/interpreter. How about that?
Oh,
I think that'll work well.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being here.
And we'll talk again soon. And I'll be looking out for your episodes that I like to listen to. They are really interesting. I really enjoy listening to your podcast.
Thank you very much, and there will be more. And listeners, I'll be with you next time on Ready for Love Radio.